right, we're going to let Carey get started in just 1 minute. But before we get started, just wanted to welcome everyone and say thank you for joining us. We are recording this webinar, so we will make it available after um, if anybody needs it. Welcome, welcome. So this is part two of a four-part webinar that IIABL is offering with Carey Wallace of Agency Focus, our favorite valuation expert. Recently was one of our wonderful speakers at our Women in Insurance conference as well. So we're excited to have her today. And she'll be doing Valuations Drivers, which will explore what really impacts agency value from the growth to profitability to risk and planning. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started, Carey.
Awesome. It is always nice to spend time with you, Kathleen. I will tell you that. All right, let me share my screen. Tell me when it's there. Can you see it?
Yes, ma'am. And if anybody has any questions, you're welcome to pop those into the chat and we'll monitor that as well.
Please do. Okay, well, we're going to talk about valuation drivers today. It's one of my favorite topics. For those of you that don't know me, I own a company called AgencyFocus, and we do valuation and perpetuation planning for independent insurance agents. We also act as a fractional CFO. We don't value any other types of businesses other than independent insurance agents. And I've been in the industry for about 16 years doing this kind of work for almost 10 now, which seems crazy, but it is true. So let's talk about what's happening in the marketplace. There are 39,000 independent insurance agents across the country. 83.7% of independent insurance agents are actually under 1.25 million in revenue. So that only leaves 16, 17% of the marketplace that is above 1.25 million. This is the number one reason that I got into valuation in the first place, which is there were so many agents that are smaller in size that did not have access to reputable valuation products and affordable. So that was the whole point, because we want evaluation to be a business planning tool. What we found at that time when we created these services was that people were waiting to do evaluation at the time of an actual sale. And what really needs to happen is prepare yourself 3 to 5 years prior to a sale to make sure that you're maximizing the value of your agency, whether you're a buyer and you want to maximize your buying power, or whether or not you're exiting or transitioning internally. Knowing what's driving the value of your agency allows you to work on those things, minimize the risk, maximize the value. So that was the reason, but there's a lot of agents in that space that did not have access to affordable and reliable valuation services. I think it's also goes without saying that there is a lot of movement inside the industry from an M&A standpoint. Why is this not moving? Let's see if I can make this move. There you go. There's a lot of movement inside the industry, and it's done nothing but get faster and faster and faster. These are the number of announced deals according to the S&P Global Market. This only represents those deals that are announced. So they're by large buyers, PE-backed buyers. This probably only represents, we don't actually know the true number of transactions that are happening inside the industry, because when it's agency to agency or agent internal from one generation to another, that is not announced anywhere. The only extra data that we have is if a bank loan is involved, we have information on the number of transactions where a bank loan is involved. But again, if it's owner finance, nobody knows that transaction happened. These announced deals we tend to think that it's probably only 10 to 15% of the transactions are being done by those announced or PE-backed or large accounts where those are announced. Let's see. These are the top buyers from 2019 to 2024. Again, those that are announced, we wouldn't know agency to agency. The reason I share this, though, is Broad Street has been an active buyer for a really long time. So is Hub. But you can see there's some that weren't active at all, and then all of a sudden have become active. You've also seen those that are really, really active have also waned. My point in sharing this is not all buyers are the same. Their appetites are different. When they recap, there's a lot of different things that either put them in the position to be heavy acquirers or potentially take a break year after year. For instance, PCF was one of the top acquirers 2 years ago, and it's not in the top 10 in this summary. So there's a lot of different factors that go into that. So if you are thinking about maximizing your value and thinking about who the buyers are out there, make sure that you get really well educated of what is happening, because those players change, and what someone might have told you happened 4 years ago, they might not be the most active buyer out there today. The multiples over time have also gotten much stronger. A lot of people ask is, you know, where's the high, and do we think that the multiples are going to wane? That has not happened, although from 2023 to 2024, the multiples have actually gotten slightly higher. This is from last year. Just this past quarter, they released what 2024 numbers are, I think in March. So the reality is, for agents that are strong and well run and focused on some of the things that we're going to talk about here that are the drivers for your agency, those multiples have remained strong. For agencies that are not, that potentially are declining or have some risk factors in them that make a buyer leery of the ongoing performance of the agency, those multiples are not these multiples. These are multiples that are announced for platform agencies, typically above 3 million in revenue. But these are the ones that we have out there. The multiple that's applied to an agency really depends on the performance of that agency. And it's very, very difficult to take one agency's multiple and apply it somewhere else, especially when people speak in multiples of revenue. You are not thinking about all the risk factors inside an agency that could make it a strong agency, and it can also make it an agency that might command lower multiples because it has some risk to it. So again, these are all about the stuff that's in the headlines, but no, those things do not apply evenly to agencies across the board. So what are the biggest drivers of value inside an agency? The two biggest components are, is the agency growing? Is it growing and profitable? And is the agency transferable? Every other risk factor that I'm going to talk about, the question is, will this thing prevent the agency from performing the way that it has or performing optimally? Are there things that would make that agency's performance either in growth and profitability change, or in potentially risk factors like loss ratios, et cetera? So these are the core areas as we're talking about these risk factors that you need to think about. Could a change in a producer in the agency or their relationships change the growth of an agency? And if so, how much growth? Well, knowing where your new business is coming from and if it's concentrated in one person or across 5 producers would answer that question differently for different agencies. Same thing for profitability. If an agency would have to hire 3 people to replace the exiting owner responsibilities, then that agency's profitability is going to look different than an agency that isn't. So the growth, profitability, and transferability are the 3 biggest components to think about the value of an agency. So let's talk about what are the other factors that happen. Well, while growth and profitability are incredibly important, there are other things to think about inside an agency, such as the size of the agency. Lots of people love to talk about multiples of revenue. It is not the only factor. It is a factor, how large an agency is. For instance, if an agency is operating at a 40% profitability, which means if it's $1 million agency, they have $400,000 left at the end of the year. Well, if that instead was a $5 million agency operating at a 40% profitability, that size changes that profitability, and that number is much greater that gets multiplied times a factor. So the size of an agency changes the value of an agency because of the multiplier that's impacted by that size. Conversely, if you have $1 million agency operating at a 20% and $1 million operating at a 40% profitability, the 40% profitable agency clearly is going to command a higher multiple because it's more efficient, and it's going to have a higher number that's being taken against that multiple. So the size absolutely matters, but it's not the only factor. How the agency operates and the risk factors that go into that multiple also matter. The strength of the agency, the strength of the book of business, the strength of the team, the technology, the infrastructure, and the policies and procedures all matter, because that will be an indicator of how well the agency is expected to continue to operate, and the dependency of which, the agency has on any one person or any one area. So if there's incredibly strong policies and procedures, everybody follows it, it's all documented in a system, there is an agency management system, or there is a CRM to track your sales process, that's going to be far more predictable in performance than an agency that's 100% paper. The owner is the largest producer, everything's in their head. They have a unexpected life event that causes them not to be able to come to work. That is going to be much different ongoing performance of the agency and ongoing continuity of that agency, because there isn't anything in the system. It's all in someone's head or in files and harder to piece together. That's one example. So the strength of the book, the strength of the infrastructure, etc., is very important. The quality of the book is also very important. If you have an agency where the owner is the largest producer and past retirement age, let's say they're in their 70s, they typically say that book will look like a decade before them and a decade behind them. So the range of ages, if it's a personal lines book, is going to be from 80 to 60. The quality of that book is different than an agency where the owner isn't the largest producer, and it's much more diverse. There's lots of different people contributing to that book. It could be a niche that's the quality. But my point is, you have to look at the overall book of business and the quality of that book, and how will it perform given the type and makeup of that book of business. Your staff is 100% your largest asset and your largest expense inside your agency. Oftentimes people are acquiring because they want to acquire staff. It's difficult to find great people. That's one of the factors that makes it attractive when you've got a well-rounded staff. They could be incredibly beneficial if agencies are able to get their staff to go beyond a sale, even if it's internal, etc. The likelihood of that agency performing well and having less retention problems is higher than one that the staff doesn't transition well with a new owner or even an internal transition, because we're so driven by relationships, and those people that have been engaged with those clients can make sure that those clients stay with the agency. So staff is incredibly critical. The technology that the agency uses, for the same reason, that whole transferability, all of these factors are important to the value of an agency. And then as you're looking as an acquirer, you could have all these things right, but the agency that you're looking to acquire doesn't fit with your overall goals or your overall makeup. One of the most profitable agencies that's one of my clients is 100% personal lines. And that shocks people sometimes when I say that, but he would be really, really not very served if he acquired a commercial lines heavy agency, or even an agency that had any commercial lines, because his machine is all around personal lines. That's how he's built his team. That's how he's built his referral service. He operates at a 45% profitability. And as soon as you put something that doesn't fit the mold, he would have difficulty running that book. So it's not a strategic fit for him. He would buy probably the personal lines part of an agency, but not the commercial lines. In fact, he refers away his commercial. That's just an example. So it could all look great, but it's got to also fit with your strategic vision for the agency. So these are some of the things that are common factors that impact the value of an agency. Let's look at number one. You should definitely, if you go through this process and you want to know how could I maximize the value of my agency, you should take a really hard look at your own financials, map your financials to the industry benchmarks, look for trends, find the peaks or one-time expenditures, isolate all those discretionary expenses to get to what is my pro forma P&L and what percentage of my revenue do I spend on each of the key categories, like how much do I spend on my staff? How much do I spend on technology? How much am I spending on marketing? How much am I spending on, et cetera, like my office or occupancy? And if you are outside those ranges, why am I overspending? And does it match with my performance? So for instance, if the average agency spends 50% of their revenue on people and you spend 70% on people, you should either be growing much faster than other agencies because you're staffed for growth, or you should, maybe you're in the middle of a transition and there's a reason for that. Otherwise, your compensation structure or your efficiency should be questioned, and you should think about that differently. Conversely, you might only spend 40% on your people when the average agency spends 50, but you are 3 times what the technology spend is for the average agency. Again, your technology is helping with the capacity of your team, and you should ask yourself, is the technology doing its job? Are we growing at the same rate as the average agency? And if we're not, maybe we're overspending there and there's some things that we need to think about. Same thing for marketing. I have plenty of agencies that are far beyond the benchmark in spending for marketing, but they're also, pushing 2 times the growth rate that the average agency has. So some of these benchmarks can give you a gut check to say, how is my performance compared to other agencies? How is my allocation of resources compared to other agencies? And are there ways that I can rethink my allocation in order to get the performance that I'm looking for? So that's one of the ways, is to look at the health of your own agency. If you don't know what the income statement categories are, in order to put them into the benchmarks to compare your financials to those benchmarks, you can use this QR code and download it. It's a free resource that we have taken and described what kinds of expenses are in each category. So if you got a report like Marshberry's or Reagan's and you wanted to compare yourself to other agencies, you can get your financials organized in a way in order to match their benchmark. So that's here for you. You also get these slides. If you if you want that downloadable thing, you can reach out to Kathleen and she'll make sure that you guys get it. But it's a great thing to have. So then you should be able to calculate what is your own profitability and what is my potential profitability if I eliminated any of my discretionary expenses, things that are not related to selling insurance, but might be being run through the agency, and also what your organic growth is. So in order to calculate your profitability or your EBITDA, you would follow this formula, which is take your total revenue less all of your expenses, that's your profit. And then you would add back any interest expense, depreciation expense, amortization expense, any taxes that you paid to the state or IRS based on the profit of your agency, and then add back any one-time expenses that will not recur, subtract any one-time expense or one-time income that also will not recur, We all had that. Many agencies had that several years ago with the PPP loan. That's a great example. But if you also have a heavy bond book, that revenue may not recur because it does not renew the same way that your commission and fee income does in standard P&C. So anything like that that's on your P&L that isn't going to continue, you might have sold an asset that shows up in your revenue, and that's never going to happen again, or it's certainly not likely to. And then add back any discretionary expenses so you can get that feel. And then you also either need to add or subtract in order to accurately represent what it would take to replace the owner in the position that they currently fill inside the agency. This is the area where lots of owners pay themselves differently. So you have to have a reasonable amount there for IRS purposes, but you might take distributions for the rest. Well, if you truly had to replace the production that the owner has or the operational role that the owner has, you need to put a reasonable amount in for that role to make sure that you have an accurate picture of what your profitability or EBITDA is. So that's, again, a resource you can have. If you haven't done that for your own agency, it's a really good idea to do that. And then knowing what your organic growth rate is. So if you're an agency that's acquiring books, you have to remove those books so you can actually see how the agency is growing, not just by acquisition. So to calculate that, you have to remove the book from the previous periods that you're using, and then ask yourself, what is driving the organic growth? Where is it coming from? How likely is it to continue? Where is it concentrated? And what are the things that could cause your organic growth to not continue the way that it always has been? For instance, is it concentrated by one producer? Is it concentrated by one referral source? Is it concentrated by whatever that one line of business? And if that line of business goes away, that could be a problem. I have an agency that was heavy in habitational. When the interest rates rose, their new business froze for a little bit. So for them, that concentration created a risk inside their agency, and they were like 90% habitational. So while everybody else was getting, they definitely took rate as well, but they weren't actually placing new business, and they were losing some of their accounts as well. So my point is, just know what that risk factor is, and you might be able to diversify some of those things. You might be able to introduce other referral sources or expand what that looks like. But as soon as you start looking at your book different, you can see those risks and then make a plan in order to minimize that risk. So I've talked a lot about risk, and you guys talk about risk all the time with your clients. My job is to help you see the risk inside your own agency. There's three different major categories of risk when it comes to the value of an agency. I've talked a couple times about concentration as an owner, concentration as a producer, concentration in one account, concentration in a set of accounts, maybe your top 10 accounts, concentration by carrier, concentration by niche, line of business, etc. So there's lots of different areas of concentration to think about. But then there's also areas of performance, loss ratios, retention, growth. Like those are the key metrics you need to know as well, the spread. And then culturally, what are the areas of risk? So one of the biggest is people. Do you have contracts with your people? Do you have producer-owned books inside your agency that could create confusion? Do you have zero contracts, so it's gray who owns what? Or 1099 employees that could also create some gray? Are your sales and service roles completely separated, or are they blurred lines? So setting compensation structures becomes challenging for those people that straddle both sales and service. So culture definitely plays a role in the risk of an agency and how predictable the ongoing performance will be and how transferable it is. So compensation structures are one of those things that can cause an agency to not be transferable, because if your comp structure is so different than what the industry average is and you wanted to go ahead and sell, a buyer may have to make compensation changes in order to have you command the price that you want for your agency. But by changing comp structures, they could lose key people. When you lose key people, you lose clients. When you lose clients, the retention goes down and the value of the agency goes down. So that risk factor of comp structures are off can really be a factor in the sale of an agency. Again, great to look at it years in advance. So either you can put a you can do all kinds of things. You can gradually change a comp structure to be closer to what the industry average is. You could create an incentive for that agent or that key person to stay with the agency in the form of deferred comp or a phantom stock plan or whatever that is. But you have time in order to get that comp challenge under control before you're looking to exit. Thinking that someone else is going to fix it will just impact the value of your agency and that predictability of the performance of your agency. So again, it's just one example. So ownership concentration is one of the biggest risk factors inside an agency when there is no perpetuation plan in place. So the fastest way an agency sells at a discount is when there's a single owner at or near retirement age or even past retirement age with no written perpetuation plan. So if a single life event causes them to not be able to come to work, their team gets nervous, their clients will get their clients will be loyal for a period of time. But if people start leaving the team when there's indecision about how to move forward, it is the fastest way that there is a discount applied to an agency. And it's the saddest way, actually. So my organization gets these calls often. And in fact, this first quarter, we had 5 agencies that fell into that category where the owner passed away either in November or December. And 3 of them, we still have not been able to finalize the plan forward. Luckily, the loss of staff is minimized, but they definitely lost some staff because they're uncertain about their future and whether or not who they're going to be working for. So having a perpetuation plan in place is one of the ways to minimize this risk. So it speeds up the time and your ability to react if something like that happens. There's carrier concentration that you should think about. So I used to, I've been doing this for a while, and I used to say you never want more than 25% of your book with any one carrier. And let's use $1.5 million revenue as the guide. Now, larger agencies, that might be difficult. But my point is you don't want more than a quarter of your book with one carrier that can change their appetite, change their comp structure, change their contingency structure. I used to hear people say that's crazy, that metric's impossible because I want to maximize my contingency. And until the hard market hit and they realized, oh goodness, I don't want everything there because that person, that agency, that carrier stopped writing business, or that carrier changed the comp structure, or that carrier did whatever. That risk became much more prevalent because of the impact of those changes when it impacts a large percentage of your agency. The agency that I had the highest concentration with one carrier was 87%. I bet anyone on this call can guess who the carrier was, but it definitely is a challenge when you have that much vested in one place. It makes it really difficult for buyers. It makes it really difficult to be able to do anything else and actually get other carrier appointments. So carrier concentration is something to think about. You can also be spread over way too many carriers where your staff is, spread really thin and you're not maximizing those relationships. So based on your size, you should have a strategy where you have a 1, 2, and 3 lead, maybe a 4, depth in the types of business that you're writing and making sure that you have multiple options in there. But it is something you should be thinking about. It's also why networks have become, 61% of independent agents are part of a network in order to round that out and not have the pressure to serve all the different carriers so you can have a wide variety to offer. But it is a factor inside an agency, and some carriers will actually have to approve appointments to buyers that don't already have an appointment with that carrier. So it can become a pretty big factor in a sale. It used to be you could target an agency that has a carrier appointment that you're going after, or you want, or you desire, and hopefully gain that carrier report appointment through that acquisition. Since the hard market, that's actually been a false assumption. And a couple of our clients have made that assumption, bought the agency only to find out they weren't able to get the contract. And now they have a book roll when the carrier that the agents or that the clients were with were actually favorable, and now they're having to rewrite that to something at a lower commission rate, lower, sub, not as favorable as where it was placed from the beginning. So that purchase was made under the assumption they could get it, and they didn't check with the carrier first, and it ended up not being as great of a buy as what they originally thought. So carrier concentration, be aware of what your own is, and also be aware of what should you be purchasing in order to augment or round out your carrier concentration to improve the overall value of the agency as well. Customer concentration is an easy one. You want no account that makes up more than 5% of your total book of business, and your top 10 should not make up no more than 25% of your total book of business. When they start to get higher like that, a buyer might pull those accounts out that are larger and put a retention clause on those accounts, because buying an agency where one account makes up 20% of the book could certainly change the purchase if that one account doesn't continue with the agency. So know what those customer concentrations are. Inside an agency, I would say oftentimes when we value an agency, we report on this, but oftentimes the data inside a book of business is unclear, how there's relationships between different companies that are all owned and managed by one person or one company. So having that hierarchy to show that concentration, because for instance, let's say, I own 6 businesses and I had a loss on one and I got angry with the agency. It's not going to impact that one that I had a loss on. It's going to impact all 6 of my accounts. So really being able to look at your data to say, what is my true risk from a customer concentration or a relationship concentration is important for you to know. You'd be surprised how many people haven't thought about it that way or didn't realize how much or the percentage of their overall is in one relationship over time. What the agency's digital presence is important as well, because that could be a factor of new business and really what new customers are thinking about the agency or what current customers are thinking about the agency, and really speak to the ongoing performance as we live in this world where we're all connected. If someone Googles and finds nothing for an agency or something very stagnant that they can't engage with, they're not going to have as high of a growth rate as an agency who has an online presence that is strong. So it's just important for you to be aware of the impact that you're putting out there. It's your first foot forward. I don't know anybody that doesn't, read reviews before they engage, or at least research people. I know I'm getting ready to take a trip, and we have looked at all the Google reviews of everything that we're thinking about as a way for us to gauge what we're going to engage with. And I think we all do that, but we forget that people are doing that about us as well. So your digital presence is important, and your online presence is super important. Why will this not work? I don't understand. So let's talk about producer concentration as well. There we go. Producer concentration is what percentage of the overall agency's written premium is with one producer? Do they have specialized expertise? What is the average age of your producers? We all focus on the age of the owner, but believe it or not, the average age of a producer is 52 in the industry. So that institutional knowledge is at risk if you have everybody, the owner, the CSRs, and the producers all are going to retire around the same time, and we don't have any younger people in order to keep that continuity. So what's that average age? And then to think about it differently, if you've got a producer with specialized um, expertise, let's say they write, charter schools, or they write um, whatever it is, they write horse farms or whatever. And their CSR or their account manager also has that specialized knowledge on how to deal with that account, and they're both at retirement age. That is a double risk factor inside an agency, and that might take an agency to say, hang on, I'm going to take all my service people and I'm going to cross train them as much as possible so we can minimize that risk. So what is the nature of the relationship with the customers? How many people from inside the agency know that customer? Can we expand those relationships as in order to mitigate that risk? What's the exposure of the agencies in the account? How does sales and service work? Is it that the producer does everything, or are there also service people in that account? And what are the contracts? Do you have a non-solicit, non-piracy contract with all of your producers? And if you have producer-owned books, um, producer-owned books you can't sell what you don't own, so they would be removed from your agency, or have an agreement that the producer would be a tag along in order to keep that strong. Typically a producer's book will not command the same price as what the overall agency will, and the agency will be stronger by having the producer-owned book involved as well. So creating a pathway to ownership, minority ownership in the agency, or a phantom stock would better position an agency to be stronger than giving book ownership that would fragment the agency upon a transition. So something to think about. What is the concentration by niche? 64% of independent agents say they have a defined niche, but according to the Agency Universe study, 54% of independent agents don't specialize in any specific industry or have an established niche. They are generalists. In the world we live in today, there are plenty of generalists that are profitable. Please don't mishear me. But those agencies that have specialization, like even if it's I only do personal lines, or I have a large portion of my book or a significant portion of my book that are veterinarians or gyms. When you have something that's specialized, you now get those processes down, you get those relationships down. It can be very, very profitable and repeatable, but it also, if it gets large enough, creates risk, because if something happens in that industry and that doesn't, that trajectory can't continue, there are pros and cons, but those that have some specialization tend to be much more profitable than those that are generalists across the board and try to be all things to all people. So it is definitely, we are trending towards finding some areas of specialization, maybe not for the entire agency, but for 3 or 4 niches, in order to create those repeatable things, have become way more profitable in agencies that are taking that approach. So concentration by niche can be the nature of the business and you need to think about the environmental forces, the volatility of the niche that you're in, what the impact of the loss ratio of the overall agency would be. If you're buying an agency that has a niche and you're unfamiliar with it, obviously understand what that loss ratio impact will be, because it could unintentionally change your performance in an area that you were otherwise really strong. Do you need specialized expertise? Is there exclusivity in an agency? That might change again, just like that carrier. If it's exclusive appointment to create, to get to a certain program, you need to make sure as part of your LOI, you would be able to gain that, or else that wouldn't be as valuable to you if you had to rewrite it. Is it ability to transfer easily? And what is the overall growth and profitability projection of that niche? And do you have the carriers and markets in order to support it? So it's a great thing, but you can't just say I'm going to do this and it's going to be great. It takes a lot of planning in order to figure out how to make that work the right way. So those are the areas of concentration. The performance areas are the number one I would tell you is retention. And it is also when we do evaluation, we ask for retention rates and we're looking for revenue retention and policies in force or customer retention specifically. About 9.5%, 9.5 out of 10 agencies cannot provide us with this information. Agency management systems are not designed to track retention. So either the agency has to have a mechanism in place and policies and procedures in place in order to know their own retention. The best they can give us is carrier reports. And you all know that that doesn't capture the movement from one carrier to another. So it can actually understate the agency's overall retention. So I think if there's two things I can change in the industry, number one, everybody would have a perpetuation plan. And number two, everybody would know their retention rate. And if you don't know this, put the processes in place in order to be able to track it and know it well. And if you know it, it's almost like buying a house. Like if you remodel the kitchen and you know your numbers and now you know what to work on, you're going to get a higher price than one that it's unknown. You aren't going to do that inspection, so they're going to have to roll the dice and they have no idea if there's mold in the house or not. Like that's my point. If they don't know that there's a retention issue and you're not able to answer it, they're going to make an offer based on the data that they have. If you have it, you're going to be far more attractive to someone because you're able to communicate very clearly what your retention strategy is. If you have a NPS score, if you know your policies per customer, if you know how many monoline accounts you are and that you're able actively working on that, if you're able to identify cross-sell opportunities, especially using AI inside your agency, like all of those things create higher retention, higher profit, higher performance inside an agency and a much more profitable agency. Because an agency that has more policies per customer than another agency the same size, the predictability of the loss of accounts is far less for someone who has a high policies per customer than one that has a low policy per customer. And that's basically because it's too complicated to leave otherwise. So if you're able to manage those statistics and know your data, you're in a much better position. Your loss ratio is something to think about. We want to know the trend by carrier. We also want to know, is it one-time impact or is it an overall, you are in trucking and you run hot, or you're in habitational and your loss ratio runs high. So it absolutely needs to be something that's on your radar, and it can really impact deals. If your loss ratio is fantastic and your top three carriers that are your leads, and the person you're looking to acquire has a book of business that maybe isn't written the right way, you might rethink it because it could really impact. While it seems like a fit, it may not be a strategic fit because maybe how they underwrite or how they look at accounts are different than a core difference in how they write their business and what things that they do. So you got to go a little deeper than what's your revenue and what's the mix. You got to say, like, what are the limits that you're offering? What are the things that you're thinking about in those accounts? Okay. This is really hard to manage. So then the last area is culture, and let's talk about a couple of the different risk factors in culture. I really can't get to my slides, which is very weird doing it this way. Sorry about that. Okay. So biggest part of culture is building your team. What's the demographic of your team? What's the demographic by role inside your team? That comp structure by role is really important. So when we do evaluation on an agency, the number one byproduct service that we end up providing is a comp analysis, because they figure out, wait a minute, my percentage of compensation is much greater than the benchmark. I need to look at my comp structure by role and figure out what I can do there. The contracts with producers and employees are incredibly important. We already talked about this, producer-owned books. And do you have the capacity on your team to acquire? And if not, how do you create capacity on your team so you're in the position to be an acquirer? Or to, create efficiency on your team. You might utilize VAs, you might you might uh, tier your customers and use automation in order to create some capacity. Lots of different ways in order to do that, but you also need to know what should the average CSR in my kind of agency be handling, and are all my people at capacity? What is the amount that a new business, a producer, a commercial lines producer, how much should they be writing? And if mine isn't, why is that? So knowing those benchmarks are incredibly important to say, is this hurting the value of my agency? I think I'm doing well, but when I look at the benchmarks and I look at the capacity numbers and I look at these metrics, I'm not performing as other agencies my size are. Maybe I should rethink it. And then in sales and service, what are those sales goals? What are the service goals that you have in mind? Do you know what your customers think about you and how likely they may be to leave the agency? Are you using something like an NPS score? Or there's several other tools out there that can help you know what your customer experience is, and basically find out, are you at risk of losing some accounts, and do you have that data so you can have your team reach out to those clients that maybe are, have given you an indication that maybe they're not happy with the agency. Agents that have this kind of insight in their book have higher retention rates because we're not treating everybody the same. We're actually focused on where we think we need to spend our time in order to maximize our retention, and make sure that our customers have an experience that we wanted to create for them. So fantastic to have that insight, but a lot of agencies do not have it. I would also say, if I'm a CSR and I'm going to join an agency and they tell me I have a tool like this that I can use that will help me be successful in reaching my retention rate goals and hitting my bonus, I'm going to be much happier with an agency that has this kind of tool available for me than being with an agency that does not. So it also is part of, how do you attract talent? How do you set the goals, and how do you set your staff up for being successful with those goals? We have a free perpetuation planning document as well. If there's anyone here that resonated with them, it's free. You can download it. You can answer the questions. It will get you, started on what are the things that I need to document so I'm not in a situation, because this is the thing that can cause an agency to sell at a discount, and also just create all kinds of stress in a time that's way more stressful than it needs to be already. So if we can help do that, we want to make sure that agents have the information they need in order to prepare for that. I guess the whole time when people ask me, is this the high with multiples, I would turn that question around and say, is this your high? Are there things that you can do to position yourselves to maximize your value? And are you willing to make the investments in technology in order to create efficiencies, in hiring, in creating policies and procedures to create efficiencies inside your agency? And if not, it could be that this is now your high, or it could be, I've done all that stuff and now I'm positioned to acquire others and really capitalize on all these efficiencies that I've built inside my agency. So for some, this could be their high. For some, absolutely not. There's plenty of road there, and knowing where you are, where your strengths are, where your weaknesses are, puts you in the position to have as many options as possible. So that is what I have for you today. If you wanted to reach out to someone on our team, I'd love to talk about it. We know that valuation is not something that a lot of people raise their hands and ask all kinds of questions about. But if you wanted to talk one-on-one, we're partners with Louisiana, and you have free 30 minutes to talk to anybody on our team. If you want to talk about anything that is related to the value of your agency or perpetuation planning, we're happy to do that.